VIBErations Podcast, Part 21, Patrick Dransfield. Hi, I'm Gary Brightman, and this is my weekly podcast called VIBErations. Established in 2018, Vibe is a book and music shop situated in Mui Wo on Lantau Island in Hong Kong. So what's been happening over the last week? Well, last weekend was Easter and also Qing Ming Festival, aka grave sweeping. So a long weekend and large numbers of people descending on Lantau for a break. Business was good, but as discussed with other Mui Wo retailers, it's our last big holiday until Mid-Autumn Festival in September. So let's hope we can have a good summer. On Monday I got my second BioNTech COVID jab and I'm feeling fine and more protected. On Easter Saturday we had our first book talk since last November. The world premiere of Larry Fane's new book The Flower Boat Girl. We took the usual precautions for the small crowd attending, temperature tests and masks and social distancing. The event went really smoothly and we simultaneously broadcasted on Facebook Live. You can still view it on our Vibe Facebook site or on our YouTube channel at Live at VIBEHK. This Saturday we follow up with another event, photographer Patrick Dransfield's talk on his new book, Track of Time, Moments of Transition. And visitors to Vibe will get 10% off this book, thanks to Patrick. Once again, we'll broadcast it on Facebook Live and hope that you can make the event. We now stock Martin Ludlow's book, Porridge with Honey. Martin's VIBErations podcast interview will be the 22nd in our series, followed by Lantau Network's website creator Martin Molden, and then Larry Fane, making up the next 3 podcasts. So if you don't want to miss any, subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, Live at VIBEHK. On Friday afternoon this week, we host View TV and Hong Kong's hottest canto pop band, Mirror, at the shop for a short, sharp shoot. More on that in our next podcast. Vibe is continuing to downsize its book stock by giving away free books every day. I still ask that you please contact me directly regarding any donations you wish to make to Vibe. We can still accept the right sort of donations, e.g. the ones that will keep us in business. And so, to this week's interview, Patrick Dransfield, a long-term resident of Hong Kong, has long attempted to express through the medium of photography and writing the emphatic correctness we share as human beings. He has a deep interest in the visual arts and literature of both the West and China. It is my profound hope that through preserving these flinting moments of Beijing street life from the 1980s, East and West can once again be reminded of our common humanity, our common needs, desires, hopes and dreams. Patrick holds a BA, Joint Honours, in English and History of Art from Leeds University and an MA in Far East Area Studies, Chinese Anthropology, Chinese History and Chinese Politics, from the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, University of London. Patrick's book, Track of Time, Moments of Transition, was published in January. The author is donating 10% of the proceeds to the Children's Cancer Therapy Development Institute in Oregon, USA. Welcome to Vibe, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Okay, so as we do, we're going to go into 10 quick-fire questions, but not necessarily quick-fire answers. Question number 1, what is your favourite book or author?
John Fowles, he wrote a book called The Magus. He wrote quite a few books, but he wrote a book called The Magus. I'm really into films, and they made a terrible film of The Magus with a very, very badly cast Michael Caine. The Magus, I've read when I was 16, I read when I was about 25, I read when I was 35, and fairly recently, and it's one of these books that you learn from. There's the character called Maurice Conscious, who is this kind of mystic Greek guy who owns this huge kind of mansion on the Greek coast of Praxos.
Okay.
And there's this rather snobby guy who went to, I think, Oxford University, the character has, and he's called Nick Oof. And it's about him being taught how to be human, really.
Right.
So different stages in my life, I've been probably quite arrogant like him, and somebody has mentored me and has been like a guru. And then you can actually also, when if you read the book several times, I could kind of put myself in the shoes of Maurice Conscious.
Okay.
So it's a very cool book.
So you identified with that character effectively.
As you grow older, I think you kind of see a responsibility for younger people, and you see the mistakes that you made, and hope that by some kind of example, maybe you can avoid the worst.
Favourite musical artist?
Has to be Bob Dylan. That was not a difficult choice.
Nice one.
Yeah. I'd actually wrote a film script once where it was terrible, but every character, so one of the characters, he was a guy called Dr. Rainbow, all he did was speak in Bob Dylan lyrics. So, he lived that life. And I think to write that, I had to actually listen and kind of read a lot about Dylan. And there's one particular one which every day there's a quote that comes to my mind from Dylan, but this one that comes today is from "It's all right, Ma, I'm only bleeding," and I think quite a few people may feel some kind of resonance. Yeah. So my eyes collide head on with stuffed graveyards, false gods I scuff, at pettiness which plays so rough, walk upside down inside handcuffs, kick my legs to crash it off, say okay, I've had enough, what else can you show me? And if my thought dreams could be seen, they'd probably put my head in a guillotine. But it's all right, Ma, it's life and life only.
Excellent. Yeah, love it. I'm a big Dylan fan as well, so respect to you for that. Good call. All right, preferred drink?
Now this was a very important question. My dad was an amateur winemaker, so there is actually a phrase that they use, and I've approximated it. I don't think I've got it quite right, but it's ludux vinum insua merita, which basically means judge the wine on its own merits.
Yeah.
So I think you can approach all of life in that way, for looking at things from their own merits. But I'm probably more fond of red wine than I should be. And if you give me a Pauillac or a Chateau Moussard, I'd be very happy.
Do you have a life motto?
Punctuality is the courtesy of kings.
Yeah.
My dad was in the Navy. I've mentioned my dad a couple of times, but he was in the Navy, and that's in a way how I came out to be in Hong Kong, because there was a photograph of him on the Bund in Shanghai when he was a young man, and I always thought, well, I'd like to do that. And being in the Navy meant that if you actually missed your ship, you ended up in prison. So he was court-martialed, or whatever the equivalent is in the Navy. So he was always absolutely punctual to a fault, and I've kind of inherited that kind of neurosis almost, actually. Yeah.
So did he ever miss his boat?
He didn't, no. And actually there was another aspect to him. He was quite crafty, really, because he always wanted to make sure he had the right billet as well. So but if you're going to be on a boat for 6 months, you want to make sure that you've got, apparently, the top bunk is the one you want. So if you're early, then you get the choice, right?
Yes.
So.
Do you have a favourite Hong Kong walk?
Yeah, I'm not very good at the geographical references, but I think it's Lantau 6. I spent a bit of time trying to look this up, and it's a one where if you get the bus up, and then you could either turn to Tai O, or you could turn up the peak, or you could get off, and you get off at the picnic section, and it's the walk that has 3 peaks, and I think one of them is Ling Wu Shan. Absolutely beautiful walk.
Okay. So, do you have a favourite Hong Kong restaurant?
Well, there's a few here, actually. I'm not a big restaurant. I mean, I eat out a lot, but I tend to be a person of habit. But one meal I was treated to recently was in Le Petit Maison, which is beautiful. It's a restaurant that's it's quite large, actually, but it seems almost tucked away. It's on Stanley Street. Brilliant French food and very nice Solminaire, and a great ambience. I think there's a few branches of it. I mean, I've only just been introduced to it, but I think they have one in London, and presumably one in France, perhaps, but also in Dubai. But they do the classic French cuisine really well. Now, for ambience, I'd have to say Tap Tap.
Good, nice one. Dear friend, Mr. Wellham.
That's right, we have to mention that. Yes. And then if it's me on my own, I'd probably sit outside of the USRC club, which has got this rather fantastic, setup where you can sit next to the pool and what have you.
Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
And the FCC, the I think one of the sustaining things that's kept a lot of people sane is being able to have a drink when we've been able to in the FCC main bar.
Faced with a python whilst walking to the peak, what would you do?
Well, I've actually rehearsed this in real life. Carmen and I were walking on that very walk, the Lantau 6, I think we'll call it anyway, whether it is or not. But anyway, we're walking up round that way. Funnily enough, I got a lift from a zoologist, and he told me what I'd actually seen because I shared it with him. So what we saw was a cobra, not a python, but we saw a cobra. At first I thought it was a dried up stick because it kind of, it's odd to see a cobra, and it was very, very, very still, and it was in that classic cobra kind of, stage. And so I have always a stick with me when I'm walking, actually, but we walked around it very gingerly, didn't approach it, even though we were not certain what we'd seen.
Yeah.
And I described it to the zoologist chap who picked me up when I was walking around Kadoorie Farm, actually, and he said, what you probably saw was a male cobra who was shedding his skin. And at that particular point, they're at their most grumpy because they actually shed their eyelids as well, so they can't see. So there's skin over the eyes, apparently.
Right.
And what we saw was the cobra at its most dangerous, actually, because it would strike because it can't see and it's scared. So to go back to your scenario, I think the first thing is to have a stick because you make a lot of noise to make sure you don't actually come across the snakes.
Yeah, they'll be to retreat, won't they, quickly?
That's right.
Yeah.
Second thing is, obviously keep away, I think, is the second point. They're more scared of you than you are of it, usually. And the third thing is they're not monkeys.
Yeah, thank God.
I'm not very fond of monkeys, and I had to throw my lunch at a monkey to get round on Monkey Hill one time, a particularly aggressive male monkey.
They're quite scary, actually.
Horrible.
And if you make, I've found, if you make direct contact with them, eye contact with them, they'll go for you.
Oh, they're even worse. Yeah, I did with this one, and
because if you take photos of them, that's what you're doing in a way.
Well, that's actually coming on to the photography bit in a bit. That's why I quite like the old
Rolleiflex style,
because you're not. I don't use it often nowadays, I'm afraid, but that is not confrontational.
Yeah.
But you're right. When you're actually, directly looking at them, they will go for you.
Yeah. Best advice you were given.
Keep a clear head and always carry a light bulb. That's a Bob Dylan one.
Nice one.
I think Ovid had something to say about if you want to be loved, be lovable. I won't attempt the Latin, but I think there's some truth in that. If you actually want people to like you, then you have to go out of your way to be a decent person, I think.
I agree with you. Finish this sentence. I live in Hong Kong.
Because of my wife, Carmen.
Okay, all right.
She's born in Hong Kong, born and raised until she was about 13 in Hong Kong. We met in London, around about 90, or she'd know exactly, so I'll be in trouble on this one, but around about 1990.
Okay.
And we came out here in 96. And so her parents are still with us, thank goodness, and that's the reason we're here. We brought up 3 kids with her parents as their mentors and what have you.
Okay, brilliant. So you met her in London, and then she enticed you back to Hong Kong.
Yeah, I lived in China before, and we'll probably go into that when we talk about the photographs a little bit, but I'd lived in China in 1985 to 86, so I was actually quite keen to come back.
Yeah.
I used to be able to speak all right Putonghua. It was never wonderful, but not too bad. So in one way it would have been kind of better for me on one level to be in a place where people spoke Putonghua, but Hong Kong's a very, very convivial place, and we've made it our home.
That was back in 96, so you've been in Hong Kong since that time?
Yeah, continuously.
Nice, good. Always on Lantau or buzzed around?
I first went out with Carmen to Lantau around about 1991, I think. It was very much impressed me. In fact, a snake was across the road; it had been run over, sadly. So that kind of strikes my memory. But we've always been able to come to Lantau because my father-in-law bought a kind of holiday little place in the 70s.
Okay.
And that's what we use actually to this day in Hampton.
Okay.
And then kind of working wise, we're actually in Kowloon. So for a long time, we lived just above the CLP Tower, the old clock tower on Waterloo Hill.
Brilliant.
First time in 17 years we did a move, which nearly killed us actually, but we moved from there to Jordan, and we just settled into a place in Jordan. Well, the Manhua building is where we are, and there's actually about 12 blocks of these blocks, and they look like radios, like the vintage radios that Vibe has a few of, and they're from the 60s, and we're on the 12th floor in one of these blocks, and we've been lucky enough to be able to knock it through and make it a little bit like a kind of, I mean, it's a bit grand to say, but New York loft sort of thing.
Nice.
And it's a very incredibly cool place. I mean, there's hundreds of restaurants, some of which are actually pretty well ranked, actually. There's even a Michelin-star Vietnamese restaurant there.
Cool.
And lots of Nepalese and, very mixed sort of place. And it used to be right on the waterfront. So it's got even some fishing shop, not that I'm into fishing, but, fishing shops. And kind of a strange hangover from the time when it was absolutely on the harbour.
Favourite area of Hong Kong?
Well, I'd have to say Hampton, and the balcony that I sit on in Hampton. We'll get perhaps onto photography in a little while, but I started taking photographs because I had spent about 2 or 3 years at school drawing and painting, takes quite a lot of time, and photography is much more kind of user-friendly in terms of what time you need to commit to it. So I hadn't painted until we'd got the Hampton flat sorted out in the way that we like it. So, and to be able to paint and draw, you've got to be able to leave a bit of a mess, which doesn't always go too well. And you've also got to get your mind in a certain place as well. And so the balcony at our Hampton flat is somewhere where I can draw and paint, and so that's where I like the best in Hong Kong.
Yeah. So you came to Hong Kong in 1996 in the spring with your wife,
and one boy. Yeah, and added 2 more children, Nicole and Jacob, along the way.
Then did you see that being, that's it now, I'm going to Hong Kong, we're going to stay there? Was it a kind of repatriation for your wife? And
I think it was. I mean, I do remember having a conversation with a lawyer friend of mine, and it was 3 years in, and I said to him, actually, if I stay here, right, much beyond 3 years, keep going, then I won't really be able to live back in London or anywhere else. And he said, well, why bother even worrying about that? And I said, yeah, that's good advice. I won't worry about that.
It is good advice, I think, yeah.
I couldn't live anywhere else, actually, to be honest, I don't
think. Yeah. So it's been a good marriage.
Yes, absolutely.
On all levels.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to your photography. So we've got your book for sale here in Vibe, Track of Time, Moments of Transition. What inspired that book, and when was it that the photography took place for that book?
Okay, so I was living in China in 1985 and 86, and actually I was in an unusual situation in Beijing in the sort of spring of 86, because I was living with a Chinese family. Which was highly unusual. It was because I couldn't actually get a room on the campus of the university, which was Beijing Normal University, Beishida. And my girlfriend at the time had been in China before. We met at Leeds University. So we were able to actually stay with a guy who was a chemist and his wife, who was an artist. They were very brave, actually, because during the Cultural Revolution they'd had a really, really rough time. They'd actually come from America to China, and to take a foreigner like me as a live-in person was quite a thing in those days.
Yeah, very definitely.
So that meant that I did a lot of cycling, because I had to cycle from the very north of Beijing, Zhongguancun, to Beishida, which is in the sort of, I guess, northeast actually, and then over to the diplomatic centre. And I picked up this camera, which was a Seagull A4 camera, which is something that I picked up in Wangfujing. I remember buying it very distinctly because Wangfujing had a pawn shop, a shop where you can obviously buy second-hand goods. And it was the only thing I could afford. So I saw this camera, I thought, well, that was quite cool. No idea what it does or how to use it. But it was 100 RMB. That was actually a quarter of my monthly salary, so that was
not cheap.
A chunk.
But
I could afford it, so I picked it up. And it kind of, I guess, became my companion over the next 3 months. I just took picture after picture, over 800 actually.
Wow.
And
35 mil?
actually 12.
12.
So it's 120 films, so there's
Okay,
12 pictures
Yeah.
per roll, which is actually quite significant because when I've been trying to use the same camera recently, and you know it's the results are good, but it's a real effort because
Yes.
you know you've really got to focus on the picture you want to take. It's not like today. I mean, of course, we didn't have digital cameras in the 80s, so you know nobody was taking pictures without film.
Yeah.
But a 12 format means that every picture has got to be something you really want to take.
Yes.
Otherwise, you've got to change the film, and it's a lot of work. I didn't have a light meter.
Right.
But I studied art with my mum, actually, funnily enough. We used to go to all these different art galleries when I was growing up, and then I did art history at university. I'd also studied some of the greats. I mean, there's a guy called Bill Brandt, who's a hero of mine.
Okay.
And he was taking photographs actually from about 1900 onwards. And he was somebody very familiar with very primitive photography. In the early days, he wouldn't even have an aperture. You know, he'd actually use his hand.
Really?
Yeah. So going back to the basics of
Yeah,
photography was a great thing.
You were taking these photos in the 1980s, and then the book is released in the 2020s.
Few good circumstances there. To be honest, I think I'd actually really got familiar with maybe 10 photographs out of those 800.
Yeah.
And that's a very practical thing. It's because those are the ones that came out of the darkroom, and I'm not a darkroom person, so they came out of the darkroom in China by the Wangfujing darkroom straight. The rest of them were all kind of curled up.
Okay, yeah.
And they were
wow.
still, actually, until 2 years ago, they were still in the tissue paper and the boxes from the darkroom, because I'd not really got around to doing anything with them. I guess it's a number of circumstances which has helped in terms of the fact that our 3 children are now in the UK. They're all in one way or another in higher education in the UK. Then we moved, so obviously we were kind of going through stuff knowing we were going to move, and I kind of knew this bag of negatives was around, but I didn't really know what to do with them, and there they were. And then there's a shop called Colour Lux in Wanchai, and the guy there very kindly agreed to straighten the negatives and scan them.
Good.
So suddenly I had them on a disc. I could actually look at them.
Yeah.
The book then came out because there's a sequence of events here as well. One of which is the consequence of COVID-19 is the events company that I was involved in, unfortunately, couldn't really sustain itself, because if you're doing 17 events around the region and you're suddenly doing none, that folded. So it gave me time.
Yeah.
Second thing is a guy called Carsten Schall, who has left Hong Kong. I believe he's in Portugal now, but he was a Hong Kong photographer for many years. Some folk may know him. He is on the rather grand-sounding Wall Committee at the FCC.
Okay, right.
Now,
right.
I always felt a little bit sort of marginalised by the FCC. This is where we go into dangerous territory, I guess. But I did think of myself as, salon de refuse at FCC, because they never really liked my pictures.
Yeah.
So I sent one in, and actually Joanne needs some credit here. She's the secretary to the CEO there. And I sent this one photograph, which is Dartong Boys, and I said, well, I've got quite a few of these, and if you guys might be interested, I'm happy to show more. She passed it on to Carsten and the committee. And to be fair, they really embraced it, and I did 19 pictures as a special, exhibition, all of them hand-signed and what have you.
Nice.
And that got into the FT, actually, the Financial Times. I'd also been kind of corresponding with Joe Ellison, who is the How to Spend It colour supplement editor. And we'd been corresponding about fashion. Actually, so something else I'm kind of interested in, and China fashion. over the years. And then she said, well, you know, I've now got this job where I'm actually the editor of the magazine, so we don't need to just think about fashion. Have you got anything that you might want to put together? So I put an article together, which is part of the book, actually. I mean, the core of the first chapter is what I wrote under Joe's kind of instructions, if you like.
Yeah.
So they published an article with about 20 pictures, which was fantastic. That drew a lot of interest to the exhibition, and I think also we're at a period of nostalgia. There's a number of reasons for that, and I think everybody's had quite an interesting time, shall we say, during COVID, and Hong Kongers will know that, you know, the year leading up to that was also very challenging. So we have been through the mill, I think, and a lot of people are quite nostalgic to times in the past, and we're getting to a certain age, I guess. I mean, I'm 56. We're all getting to an age where we reflect back on our time. So a lot of old China hands, and I use that, you know, kind of with some discretion, but a lot of the, you know, foreigners who could leave China feel very nostalgic about the 80s, because it was very different. Particularly, you know, 86, this I think would be, you know, the liminal time of China, where everything was possible. Chinese people, I wanted to do the exhibition in Beijing in January of last year, but of course that proved to be impossible. And Chinese people's reactions are very different. They're much more measured, because of course this was a time which captures actually a period of time where China wasn't rich, and people were, you know, hopeful for the future, but also conscious that China was not, you know, the equal of other countries at that particular point. So there's kind of a poignancy there. And so the book came about because people had responded so well to the exhibition. And I'd been in publishing for a while, so it just seemed a natural extension to put it together. It didn't take long. It took 12 weeks, and I was very lucky that Rana Mitter, the great Chinese historian, China historian, from Oxford University, agreed to write a foreword for it, and it's about 60 photographs in it altogether.
60, okay.
Yeah, so you get a good deal for your money.
Yeah. And of course you're going to be here at Vibe on Saturday the 10th of April, 2 p.m. You're going to do a presentation on the books and the photos, and book signing for people that are interested. Yeah, and if you'd like a bit of a preview, I'm not sure what format we'll do it, but I may talk a little bit about art history in relation to the books, to the book. And I did this with the Asia Society as a launch of it in January. Yeah. So if folk want to listen to a YouTube of that, it's a little bit long, it's an hour, but what I wanted to do with that was something a little bit different from what's in the book. And you know, to sort of extend myself and challenge myself a little bit, because I did study art history, and I wanted to kind of reflect on why these particular pictures work, and you'll have to see the pictures themselves to make a judgment for yourself as to why they work. But I think one of the reasons is that I'm particularly inspired by people like Rembrandt, and particularly also Vermeer. And if you imagine Datong particularly, but also Beijing, there were no cars on the roads. There were still mule tracks around, you know, people, you know, transporting things with donkeys and what have you. So it really was going back into a different time, and the photographs are black and white. Just a quick word about the actual Siegel camera, because in some ways it is the star of the show. Actually, is a camera you hold by your chest, and it's a periscope. So it means that I can actually be talking to you, Gary, whilst I'm actually taking the picture. And you won't necessarily be aware. Now, I'm not trying to be too candid with this, but we can engage on a very human level. Eye contact. Yes. And people were, I mean, the other aspect to it, which I think a lot of younger people may not appreciate, and I think we've all forgotten actually, so everyone, is that photography and having a photograph taken was quite a
big thing. I mean, if you
Yeah.
go back to when you were at school,
Yeah,
are
yeah.
there many pictures of you?
1960s, 1970s, yeah.
Any pictures? Not many.
Yes, yeah, I have got a few. I mean, generally it would be form photos that would be taken, from your year, or I was a footballer, so I had football photos. Yeah.
But they'd be quite formal, wouldn't
yeah,
they?
yeah, they would.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would all be staged. Yeah.
So one person that did pop along with his wife to the exhibition, who was from China and is about my age, was really interesting as to what he had to say, because he said, because they were looking at the stuff in the pictures, right?
Okay.
'Cause there's quite a lot of stuff in terms of,
technically.
if you look at them carefully, like for instance, there's a couple in there which I call First Love. And they're not holding hands. Actually, they're holding a bag, which showed that actually any kind of physical contact was kind of rather frowned upon. It was very, place of great surveillance.
Yeah.
I guess. But the second thing is, the guy is wearing a watch. And my friend who I'd met at the exhibition, who was one of the few people from China, obviously here, because we've been cut off, he said, well, I remember I got myself a Phoenix bike, right, a big Phoenix bike, which meant that I could get a girlfriend. And his wife, who obviously had been his girlfriend, said, yep, okay, so he could be able to take her out on a date on his big bike.
Yeah.
And he said the next thing you got when you got married was, your wife, to be would get some jewellery, and the guy would get a watch. And then the next thing you'd get would be a Seagull camera to take the pictures of the offspring. There would only be one, I guess, and that was to share with the grandparents.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, in the pictures, it's quite interesting because
all those big
points
periods of time.
That's right. That's right.
All captured. That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's almost like your 18th birthday in the UK, your 21st, and then your wedding, and then the christenings of the kids, and we do similar, don't we, in a way?
Yeah. So people have asked me, they've said, so are these pictures staged in any way, or why are people so kind of happy to be in these pictures? And I think partly it's because I could speak a bit of Chinese, and I was kind of cycling around this foreigner who was kind of I guess a little bit engaging, and everybody was kind of on the streets. I mean, most of the entertainment that people actually did was on the street, so people were kind of intrigued, had this kind of rather wacky camera that they recognized. I mean, they knew this is a camera that wasn't looking so unusual as it does today. But I think also to have your photograph taken was something of a life event, so people were kind of thinking, oh, okay, I'm happy to,
yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Even though I don't know whether they knew or they didn't know, but they would never see that photo. Right. That just the development process of that negative would take time.
Yeah. So people have asked me what other photographers were around at the time, and I'll go to that. There's a guy called Adrian Bradshaw, and he's done a great book which is called When the Door Opened, and again they're black and white photographs. And Adrian was using a Leica camera, and we knew each other then because I was working as a kind of best job I ever had was actually reading the newspapers for Newsweek, kind of like a librarian sort of job. And Adrian would walk in with his Leica, and he'd be taking lots of pictures of things like Pavarotti, and I guess he might have been around when Wham were there a bit earlier, and all that kind of stuff, right? So those are those photographs. Mine are different because I was living in a different circumstance. I was actually living with a Chinese family, and basically, they're much more about ordinary street life. Yeah. And one thing that the proceeds go to a children's cancer research charity in Oregon, actually. So some of the proceeds, and that's something I feel quite passionate about, having gone to the campus. It's on Nike's campus in Portland, Oregon. And anyway, Charles Keller has written a brief acknowledgement in the book, which talks about ordinary people doing ordinary things. Yeah. Which picks up on your point, Gary, that I think it's really important that we all recognise the fact that we all have basic human attributes, needs, desires, and in this time where just going to a broader perspective here, there's an awful lot of vitriol, an awful lot of us and them, And I think we have to be reminded of our own,
Yeah.
all our common humanity.
Yes. Anything else you want to say about the book?
Well, you get a special discount if you come to Vibe. So
Yeah,
that's
thank you for
important. Yes, no, my pleasure. And I will on April the 10th. My birthday's on April the 12th, actually, so it's quite good timing.
We better have a nice drink.
April the 10th, I'll bring the Seagull camera and I'll show people. I think it's actually quite important to see the piece of kit because it actually is different from what most people recognise as cameras these days. And of course, I still take photographs. I use a Leica most of the time, but also my iPhone, so I'm no different from anyone else. But that camera is a little bit special, so I'll bring that along to show people as well. I would encourage everyone to keep taking pictures, and if you're serious about it, I'd probably try and get away from digital for a while because there's one or two budding photographers out there, I'm sure, who may be listening to this. And my advice to anybody who is keen is, first of all, actually look at the great masters, not just necessarily photographers, but be interested in the painters of the 17th to the 20th century and absorb those, because those people have had to actually really think about framing because they painted large oil paintings or whatever, so you could be really inspired by them. And I think one of the things that I've found, because we've all gone through various from analog to digital, and I did it, actually I didn't really do it, I kept all my vinyl, I'm very glad to say, but people tend to throw stuff out. Going back to the basics, I think, was a great opportunity for me to just really learn, strip down how to take a photograph, and there's a great piece of advice from a guy called Harry Callahan. Now, Harry Callahan, I only got introduced to Harry Callahan by luck. I happened to be able to go to Washington one time. There was an exhibition of Harry Callahan's work. But I'd realised that he'd taken every photograph I'd ever thought about taking and taken them much better. He only spent a week in Hong Kong, and his photographs of Hong Kong are better by miles than mine from many years. But Harry Callahan was quite interesting because he was a very down-to-earth guy. He'd actually worked in the Ford factory, and then he'd gone to art school. He'd gone to the Chicago School of Art, which in the 30s had all these guys who'd been banished from Hitler's Germany. So all the Bauhaus guys were there. So you got a guy with a work ethic who his phrases are actually really quite almost like Leonard Cohen in their terseness, which is a photographer always has a camera. Okay, fair enough. I may have taken 500 photographs in my lifetime which are any good, the rest are rubbish. That's another one. But he was inspired by these great minds and the Bauhaus. We know all our modern design comes from these guys, and very progressive, very avant-garde ways of looking at the world, but also with that kind of very Protestant work ethic where he would craft and work his photography every day, and I think he's one of my inspirations.
Okay, good. All right, well, that just remains for me to say, Patrick Dransfield, thanks very much for coming to Vibe.
And thank you, Gary. It's been a great pleasure.
You can listen to all our podcasts published at SoundCloud under Gaz, or on YouTube under Live at Vibe HK, or follow the links from my website at vibehk.com. Finally, a reminder that Vibe is open 7 days a week, every day of the year, from 12 noon until approximately 6:30 p.m. Well, that's it for another week. Thanks for listening to the 21st Vibe Book and Music Shop podcast called VIBErations. I'm Gary Brightman. You get my vibe?
Can you imagine what this old island must have looked like to those Dutch sailors when they first saw it? Fresh green. Like a dream of a new world.
They must have held their breath. Afraid it would disappear before they could touch it.